Welcome to the Home Team, the show where no matter who you root for here, you're part of the home team. I'm your host, Wyatt Bagnall, and today we are recapping the Divisional Round of the 2024 NFL playoffs. Only 3 games left this season. It's been an interesting postseason, I suppose you could say, but before we jump in, hit like, hit subscribe, and without any further ado, let's recap these. So, we'll go in order. Chiefs-Texans on Sunday. Chiefs win the game. In a, I suppose the best thing that you could say about it is ugly manner. So let's get this out of the way now. Obviously, for anyone that watched the games, if you're somebody that believes the NFL has preferences and rigs games or tries to influence games, because I think it's kind of impossible to truly rig them, but you can influence them. If you were of that opinion, this was a really good game for you to watch. There were definitely some penalties in this game that went specifically in the favor of the Kansas City Chiefs that were egregious. They were pointed out as egregious on the broadcast. Basically, nobody can come out and actually defend those penalties without looking like a complete fool. Specifically, some roughing and unnecessary or like personal foul type stuff several times regarding Patrick Mahomes. And is it ridiculous? Yes. Is it part of the reason I hate the Chiefs? Yes. But granted, it's part of the reason I hate modern offense and believe that this is the single worst era of the NFL. Like, I think that we're in the least competitive era of football because of the way that the game is legislated. And it's also why I don't think there's an offensive player at any position that you could ever call the greatest of all time at their position, because they simply play a much easier, more protected, soft version of the sport. And they could be the greatest of their era, absolutely, but I don't put modern era offensive players in the conversation with past eras. I think that there's a line that needs to be drawn, and this game was just further evidence of it. Do I believe the NFL rigs games? No. Do I believe that Patrick Mahomes gets calls that other quarterbacks don't? Yes. But I do think that it is important that we contextualize this in several regards. Number one, this is a problem with the sport, and it's why the sport is, to me, at its worst. Number two, oftentimes in any game, there are penalties that, aren't considered good calls. And also, there's a winner and a loser. So whoever wins the game, if they got any calls like that, it's going to look really bad. Now, some of these were bad. Like the Will Anderson one, it was a third down. The Chiefs got points out of the drive after that. So it's not good. So is it pretty? Nope. Do I like it? Absolutely not. Is there anything we can do about it? Unfortunately, no. I suppose all you could hope for is there's enough pressure being put on it throughout this week that the NFL sort of sends a mandate to these refs of sort of like, hey, got to hold the whistle and like hold the flag on some of these. But I really think it has to be an off-season thing, unfortunately. It has to be addressed of like, hey, if these quarterbacks are going to run, you have to let them get hit. And unless they're like directly like speared in the head, that flag needs to not come out. But it doesn't seem it's going to go that way. The other thing to talk about here in terms of that is the great teams of every era. Because they're in so many big games, you're going to see them more, and you're going to see any of the penalties that you don't like and they go their way when that team wins. It's not going to be thought of very well. So I do think there is a level of intellectual honesty that needs to be presented here. Does that mean I like the penalties? Absolutely not. Does it make some games near unwatchable for me? Absolutely. But I do think if you look through probably the last 10 to 15 years, you would see some penalties like that. Granted, in like the post-2017 era, when they started making it like you land on quarterbacks, it's a penalty. Did it get so much worse after that? Yes. So I want to get that out of the way, just because I want to say I don't think the NFL's rigging games. I don't think they can completely rig games, but does it suck? And is it horrible optics? And is it and did it definitely have an influence on the game? For sure. But other than that, the Texans also made other errors. They gave up 8 sacks. They also missed 3 field goals, I believe it was. And let me confirm that. 3 field goals. Missed 2 field goals, and it looks like an extra point, I think. So they had their opportunities in terms of that. It's sort of the playoff game that went sort of how you think. Ugly, nothing super impressive really going on by either team. There's one throw in there by Mahomes for a touchdown that was sort of a classic, like, acrobatic throw, which I suppose you'd say that's the most impressive throw of the game. But overall, neither offense was really super impressive. I felt both these defenses, did their part to a certain extent. I mean, I don't know. It was just sort of an innocuous game, other than the penalties were brutal. The Chiefs advanced to the AFC Championship. I believe it's the 7th straight year. Not super shocking, given who they drew. So, looking forward to next week. I think, me and all of America is rooting for the Bills to go in there and win. But in Arrowhead, Kansas City is a very tough team. When I preview those games, I'll get to why I think them and the Bills have gotten this far, because I don't think any of us think that they were the most talented teams in the conference, but they were really good at one specific element of the game. And I'll get further into it in that breakdown, but they're two teams that really don't beat themselves very often. They play really clean ball. And when you play clean and you just simply don't let the other team get away with sloppy stuff, you'll win most of the games in this league, because there's a lot of sloppy football. So I would say that was really the defining thing today. The Chiefs got 8 sacks, and the Texans missed 3 kicks. And then some unfortunate penalties at unfortunate times were really the defining features of this game. On to the next one, which was the Washington Commanders at the Detroit Lions. This was the shock of the day, no doubt. For me personally, it's pretty disappointing. I like the Lions, and I hate to see a team be undone by injuries. That wasn't the only thing that undid the Lions, but it was certainly a big part of it, where obviously going into the game, they had, I believe it was 18 players on injured reserve on the defensive side of the ball. Very early in the game, Amik Robertson, one of the starting corners, snaps his arm. He's out. They just couldn't stay healthy on defense. Does that mean Washington wouldn't have won this game? Maybe not. But you can't really go about this game without addressing that that's a factor. I don't believe Washington scores 45 points if Detroit just had like a normal injury season on defense. Not to say they have to go in there completely healthy, but if they just had, cut that in half, 9 guys on injured reserve, I think that you would have seen a much more impressive effort. As for where you do give Washington credit, number one, Jaden Daniels played phenomenally. He's a great rookie quarterback. He's got a super bright future. I think that while it's not overwhelmingly likely that this team beats the Eagles, I do think it's possible, because I think he's better than Jalen Hurts. But he played outstanding in this game, and he's played outstanding in big moments. And he just doesn't seem to get rattled, which is, I think that's like the real common trait between great quarterbacks is they're just calm guys. They're calm under pressure. Something can go wrong, and it's not the end of the world. It's the people that keep dwelling on things when it goes wrong. It could be something small. Something small goes wrong, and you just can't get past it and get your stuff going. Those are the people that fall short in important situations. And that's true of quarterbacking. And as a result, I think Jaden Daniels did a phenomenal job. Obviously, they scored 45 points. They were spurred on by an early pick six, and that's the other thing that we need to address here is the Lions' offense just refused to not turn the ball over. I believe it was 5 turnovers they had. 3 picks from Jared Goff, 1 from Jamison Williams, of all people, who that's a whole different thing of doing. Is that the guy you want throwing the ball with your season on the line? And then I think there was a fumble in there as well. And it sort of overshadows a lot of great things that happened. Sam Laporta had the play of the game, in my opinion, in terms of most impressive play of the game. The true play of the game was in the second quarter. I believe it was in what was maybe my least favorite second quarter I've ever watched of football. I hate these quarters where just no matter who touches the ball every time you score. I hate that because it's not usually that like, oh, the offense is so great. It's just bad defense. And that was what I was feeling watching this game. Like there was a point in this game where I just didn't even want to watch the damn thing anymore. But on the whole here, there was a pick six that sent this game from being a close like field goal game to being 10 points. And then all of a sudden the Lions start extending. They start to drive to get it close again. Then they turn it over in the red zone. And that's just not something you can do and win football games, especially not in the playoffs. And I think that this sort of shows Detroit's inexperience in winning moments where, once again, to get back to what I was talking about with the Bills and the Chiefs, Detroit kept being risky in moments where you don't need to be risky. They kept trying to be like cute and do these weird plays in the moments where you really can't have that. And it bit them. And I said in my preview video that one of the things Washington would have to do to win this game is win critical downs, so third and fourth down. And they dominated it in this game. Their offense had several fourth downs, and it felt like they converted every single one. They were really, really good in that situation. And Detroit, they couldn't stop them on those downs. And in key situations on offense, either they couldn't convert it or they wouldn't even give themselves the chance to get there because they'd turn it over. And that's really the way it went. When you have a defense that's as injured as theirs is, you can't keep putting them out on the field. They've won so many of their games down the stretch as those injuries accrued because their offense was just overpowering. And they were scoring and they were scoring. And then when you're able to score like that, it makes the other offense one-dimensional. And now you're really only defending one part of the game. And Washington didn't let that happen here. And as a result, the Detroit Lions, their season is over. I believe that if they were healthy, they were the best team in the NFC. But even the best team in the NFC, I don't know if you win if you turn the ball over 5 times. So outside of the injuries, turnovers were a killer. And Ben Johnson's now hired by the Bears. Who knows? I mean, this really felt like this was the year for them to do it. Not that their window's closed by any means, but take it from somebody who like is a fan of a team that's had their coaching staff poached. The 49ers have never really been the same since their coaching staff got absolutely like ran through, where that first 19 year where it's like it's Robert Saleh coordinating the defense. And it was great. And the players were all good and young and cheap. And then, you start to lose guys. The next year they got injured and they weren't able to do it. And then Saleh was hired away. D'Amico Ryan steps in, does a great job as the defensive coordinator once again. So good that he gets hired away as the head coach after 2 years where I felt our defense was at its best. And ever since he left, we haven't been able to get it back to that premier level. And I worry that the same could happen for the Lions, where you had everything firing on all cylinders here. Coaching was on point. Players were on point. Everybody believed in themselves. It's a weird thing that happens to teams when you're so confident that it's the year, and then not only do you miss the Super Bowl, you fall shorter than you did the year before. One of two things will happen. Either the Lions will come back with a fire, even like burning even hotter than they did before, or they're going to sort of question themselves and look at the changes that are happening around them and wonder if they missed their shot. I believe in the culture in Detroit now, but this is the type of end to a year that can have a little bit of a lingering effect because it's so disappointing and so gutting. I suppose the best way to do it is you just justify to yourself that like it was the injuries and we gave them the ball, and there's that. But as for Washington, they move on to the NFC Championship against the Eagles, and I'll be rooting for Washington to get that win. We've never seen a rookie quarterback make, much less win, the Super Bowl. I think that this would be a hell of a story if they do. I don't know that they win, but they're playing a division team. Division games can get weird, and Washington has momentum, which is huge in the playoffs. So often, it's not the team that's the best that wins the Super Bowl. It's the team that just got hot at the right time, and Washington has caught fire. So I'm very interested to see how the NFC title game goes. So that is the Detroit Lions and the Washington Commanders. onto the Sunday games, where the Rams and Eagles started things off. Philadelphia wins 28-22 in a snow game. There are some disappointing moments in this game, at least from a Rams perspective, where there's some drops on in key situations. The Eagles' defensive line had some really good moments, Jalen Carter in particular, which is not particularly shocking. I would have thought that the Rams, given that they had Aaron Donald for all those years, would have had some pretty good ways and ideas of how do you stop a dominant defensive tackle. But in this game, Jalen Carter, especially in key moments like the last drive of the game, he came through. He came through big. And he really disrupted the last 2-3 plays of that drive and sent the Eagles to the NFC title game. Other than that, the hero of this game, I know a lot of people are going to want to say Saquon Barkley. He was great. Whenever they have a great rushing game, I say it's that offensive line, because you can stop the run game in almost any scenario, which is numbers. But you can only do so much against the Eagles because that offensive line is so good that at least 4 guys are going to win their block on any given play. And when you have Saquon Barkley back there, he's very explosive, obviously. And as a result, you get those long touchdown drives. Like the one that everybody thought was the dagger was that like massively long one right at the end, like about I want to say 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter, somewhere around there. Puts the Eagles up 2 possessions, 2 touchdowns. And I think everybody at that point was thinking, okay, that's it. Then the Rams go down to get a quick score, like really quick score, and then they kick it back to the Eagles. They stop them, get the ball back, and then they made it interesting there for a second, but ultimately the Eagles won the game. What do I take away from this game? It went about how you would expect, honestly. Like, I think this is probably the least controversial game out of all the ones we saw, or at least the one that probably comes out with the least amount of storylines, where they both went in, they both played a pretty clean game, and in the end, the Eagles just made a few more plays. I maintain the way to beat the Eagles is pretty simple. It's like you got to stop the run, because Jalen Hurts in these games, when he's asked to throw, they are not dynamic on offense right now. Like, it's just not clicking. They have all the talent in the world to do it, but it's just not clicking. And he seemed to injure his knee a bit in this game. That's something to monitor going into the Washington game. Would I favor them to win the NFC Championship? I do, and that's a credit to Howie Roseman. I think I've said this before, I think he's the best GM in football. If you want just a masterclass on team building, on foresight in roster construction as well, in like salary cap, in like when to extend, when to let guys leave, watch the Eagles for like the last couple years. It's masterful work. And I think Howie Roseman does a great job. The fact that the Eagles keep being in these close games, it's an indictment on Sirianni and on Jalen Hurts that they aren't blowing these teams out, because talent-wise, they're at that level where they could and should. But regardless, they're winning these games, and I think that the Eagles will likely be going to the Super Bowl, but I don't put it past Washington to make something crazy happen. On the whole here, Saquon Barkley obviously had a huge game with 200 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. Like, they were huge. But I think that the big story here is just, the right team won and on to the next. Like, the Rams, it was a good story. They beat Minnesota, and I suppose it's really all you could really hope for the Rams at this point. They're just not on that level yet in terms of building their team back. That's all I really have for you. Like, in terms of this game, I wish there was something more controversial, something more, interesting to jump into with it, but it was a pretty straightforward game. They played tough, both of them. The weather was not a huge factor. I think the Rams showed a little bit in terms of catching the football, that they weren't super used to it, but not so much where you'd be like, wow, they just collapsed. So yeah, I think that's all I really have to say about that. Eagles, Commanders, NFC Championship. It'll be a hell of a game, I hope. Last game, the one everybody was really hoping for and interested in, myself included. So, the Buffalo Bills, they defeat the Baltimore Ravens 27-25. Thank God. This is the type of game where, had the Bills lost, I would have really been considering not watching the last 3 games of the season. But luckily, the Bills won. So this was a game that I think is really interesting because in a lot of ways it went how people thought, which is, including myself, which is the Ravens are a bad matchup for the Buffalo Bills. The Ravens were able to move the ball with next to no problems. Like, I think it was they didn't even punt in the game. But what happened was, as much as they were just getting moved on, the Bills came up with the big plays in the game. And the Bills offense did not allow themselves to put their defense in a bad spot, essentially. But in this game, Lamar Jackson throws an interception, and then there was 2 fumbles in this game, along with 2 costly drops by Mark Andrews. One of them will live in infamy amongst the fan base of the Baltimore Ravens, no doubt. So right away, both these teams open up quickly and scored. And at that point, we're thinking, okay, here we go, MVP showdown. Like these teams are going to go. But in a lot of ways, that was sort of the first half, and in the second half, these defenses, tightened the screws, and it became a bit different. We'll get to the main stuff right away. Obviously, the Bills go. They're like 3rd and 2 from the goal line. They try to run a QB run. Josh Allen gets stopped. They kick the field goal, go up 8. Right? Cool. Couple minutes left. You're hoping like, okay, we just don't give this up. They have to get a touchdown, 2-point conversion just to tie. That's the scenario. And Lamar drives the Ravens down, and with a few good plays of good pass protection mixed with him buying some time and resetting his feet, he rips a touchdown to Isaiah Likely. And at this point, everyone's like, oh my God, we're going to overtime. But there is about a minute and a half left at this point. We're going to overtime. So the Ravens line up for 2-point conversion to tie the game up, right? Here we go. We run. It's a play all these teams run. The tight end gets outside. There's another one behind it. And really, really often that play works. And in this situation, the play worked. He was open. Like, it was all right there for the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar throws the ball. He threw it a little bit behind and maybe a little bit later than you'd like, but a ball that could and should be caught, and it goes through the hands of Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews drops the 2-point conversion, and the Ravens, they don't recover the onside kick. Right away, first play, Bills hand the ball off. They break off a first down. The game's over. Now, I think that it's important to be said, Mark Andrews also had one of the fumbles in the game, and he also had a pretty bad drop earlier in the game. It was not a good night for Mark Andrews. I don't want people to lose that he's an awesome player. He's been a great player for the Ravens for a long time. He's the best tight end that's ever played in Baltimore. But this was not his night. And unfortunately, when it's this type of a moment on that type of a stage, he's going to be remembered for that. Maybe not amongst Ravens fans necessarily. I would think and I would hope that he's remembered for all the great stuff he did. But for the common fan who doesn't watch the Ravens every week, that's going to be a moment that sticks with people because it was huge. And my heart breaks for the guy. He's a great player. He's been a Pro Bowler. He's been an All-Pro caliber guy. And it just didn't happen. Now, I know the narrative also exists out there that Lamar Jackson does not play great in the playoffs. And I think that he had a bad interception earlier in this game. He sort of broke it down a little bit in his post game where he's like, I read the coverage. I knew what they were doing. Milano got some pressure on him. He didn't find the safety, even though you know the coverage, you still need to identify where these guys are. But the pressure got there, and Lamar ripped it, and the safety was there and got it. And then the other one, snap comes, Lamar drops the ball, tries to pick it up, runs, drops it again. Von Miller picks it up, returns it the other way for a decent return, and the Bills get some points out of that one. And I think that ultimately those are the things that turned the game. Baltimore was not having problems moving the ball against the Bills. But when it came time for turnovers, it was the Ravens that gave them away. The Bills haven't given them away. In fact, they just broke a record for for the most games in a single season with no giveaways. And I think that that's going to be huge going into Kansas City for Buffalo. But as for Baltimore, I think ultimately Lamar Jackson, outside of those 2 plays early, he played well, but unfortunately those plays count. And while I do think that nobody ever really talks enough about how the quarterback drove them down there and then something else happened and they lost, but we've given Joe Burrow and Josh Allen and a lot of other quarterbacks credit for putting their team in the position to win even though they lose. And I think that grace should be given to Lamar Jackson here. Do I think that he's going to win MVP? I think he is. Would I give it to him? No. I'm in the camp that Josh Allen should be the MVP because I think he did the same amount and got his team to a better position in the playoffs with less talent on the team. But I think this narrative that Lamar is the reason they lost this game is a little unwarranted. He had the 2 plays that are bad, I'm aware. But he drove them down. He delivered the ball to tie the game, and it got dropped. Like, we've seen Josh Allen and Joe Burrow both be in positions where they almost beat Kansas City, and we give them a lot of credit because they made it a fight. Lamar made this game a fight. Do I think he's a top 5 quarterback in the league? You bet your ass he is. And I think that this isn't a game that should be heaped into the pile of Lamar choked. Because ultimately, they scored the touchdown. They had the 2-point possession, the 2-point conversion. The ball got there, and it got dropped. So, as far as Baltimore goes, it's a tough one because you feel like you keep hitting your head against the ceiling, and you don't always know where to turn to, where to pivot, how do we change this? And sometimes there is no changing it. But I think if you're the Ravens, you know you're going to be relevant moving forward. Granted, I do sometimes worry about how big is the Ravens window. And I worry about this with a lot of these teams because I don't know yet, which is in this era of quarterbacks who run and move around more and it's a much bigger part of their game, does their prime and does their longevity, like does their window close faster? Because the athleticism will go faster. Guys like Brady played for as long as he did because he was never a guy who relied on the legs. And you can stand in place and throw a ball for a long, long time, but you can't scramble and outrun everybody forever. So I suppose that's the one thing if I'm Baltimore I'm a little concerned about is how many more years do we have of him being able to do this? Because we've seen him deal with injuries in the past. He's had good luck with it the last 2 years, but you never really know until, you never know until you know, essentially, where injury, like team players that become chronically injured, it tends to come out of nowhere. Like, they tend to be good for a really, really long time, and then they just hit the point where the body's had enough. So I wonder about that for Lamar, but I hope it's not next year. As for the Bills, on to Kansas City, time to slay the dragon, plain and simple. I think that the Ravens were the toughest matchup for them in the playoffs, stylistically. If you were able to slay this dragon, you can slay that one. I'm rooting for the Bills. I hope it's a Bills-Commanders Super Bowl. I think it's going to be Bills-Eagles. I do think the Bills will go into Kansas City and win because I believe that so much of beating the great team of any era is just believing you can do it. And the Bills are a team that they got no reason to fear the Chiefs. You know, they've never been blown out by the Chiefs. When they've lost to them, it's been really close, razor-thin margins. And when they beat them, it's the same type of thing. Like, they know that they can hang with them. They know that they can win in Arrowhead. They've gone into Arrowhead and won before. Now it's just about doing it when it's win or go home. And I'll be rooting for them. I hope it's Bills-Commanders. I think it's Bills-Eagles. If it's Chiefs-Eagles, I don't know if I'm going to watch that game, honestly. But I'm excited. I think ultimately I only have one team left in this competition that I even think is good, at least in terms of being likable. I suppose the Commanders are likable. I'm just so aggressively neutral on them that I don't really care that much. I like Jaden Daniels, though, so. But it was a great game. I don't think there was much more you could ask for from an MVP showdown unless you were going to say you wanted it to be the second quarter of Lions-Commanders the whole way, in which I would tell you that That's not MVP football. It's just bad defense. So that was the divisional round. Hope everybody is enjoying the playoffs. And let's hope that we get a good last 3 games. So, yeah. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hit like, hit subscribe. Peace.